We are wrestling.
The entity we knew as Bray Wyatt has now disappeared from Twitter, only to be replaced by a new presence. @Wyndham6 is the new handle for the artist, now only known as Wyndham. Shockwaves were felt when WWE announced the release of Bray Wyatt. Despite all of WWE's cuts to the roster, certain superstars felt infallible, as if they were, bulletproof. In this video, I will go over the best and the worst of Bray Wyatt in WWE, starting from the very beginning in 2012. It's easy to forget about the original incarnation of NXT that aired between 2010 and 2012. It was a strange game show that paired newly signed rookies with veteran superstars, with the eventual winner signing onto the main roster. It was a little bit like WWE Tough Enough, apart from the fact that it was absolute trash. The only good thing that came out of it was the Nexus, a stable that formed from the rookie stars of the first season who had a fantastic debut and looked like they could be the next New World Order. That's before John Cena ruined everything, of course, but that's another story. The second season of the show produced almost no notable future superstars apart from Titus O'Neil and the soon-to-be Bray Wyatt, who had to perform under the name Husky Harris. I mention this moment before Wyatt's eventual character debut in 2012 to show you just how incredibly talented Wyndham Rotunda is when it comes to inhabiting his characters. Yes, firstly, Husky Harris looks completely different to Bray Wyatt, but even personality-wise, you'll be hard-pressed to connect them together as the same man, unless you knew better. But in our age of wrestling fandom, where every backstage incident is reported to us and every wrestler's real name is there for us to see, WWE made the clever move of subtly referencing the past when Wyatt debuted on the new NXT in 2012. I've been through hell, man. I know how cruel it can be. I know what it's like. I know what it does to a man. It changes him. It makes you stronger. It took away my ability to feel fear, to feel pain. I'm not afraid anymore. His promos alluded to his past as the chance of Husky Harris from the fans upon Wyatt's debut was inevitable, but it didn't last long. Fans soon fell in love with the character of Bray Wyatt, who was immediately presented as a cult leader that had risen up from adversity. So many fans remembered this debut and the addition of Luke Harper and Erick Rowan to form the Wyatt family, and held on to the intrigue and excitement for the character on debut. It certainly helped a lot of fans get through the bad times that were coming. By 2014, Wyatt was delivering compelling stories, the character was being utilised correctly, and the intrigue was still in place. It really helped when Wyatt had a foil that was as convincing as John Cena to oppose him. As with many WrestleMania storylines, WWE really showed that when they could be bothered, it was still possible for them to produce great wrestling television. By WrestleMania 30, it really felt like John Cena had done everything he possibly could do as a babyface, and unless WWE were willing to finally turn him heel, there wasn't a lot left for him to do. As was later proven, by 2014 it was the beginning of the end for his full-time in-ring career, and now was the time to start putting over new talent to replace him later on. Bray Wyatt and his Wyatt family were on a hot streak by 2014, coming out on top, and it looked like a no-brainer that Wyatt would be one of the emerging superstars to secure his place in the main event for many years to come. The character was strong and the fans truly believed in him. The story leading into the match at WrestleMania 30 was great. Cena wanted to preserve his legacy of over 12 years. If he was going to go away, then he wanted his legacy left intact. Wyatt wanted to burn Cena's legacy to the ground and then rise up in his place. The match itself was only okay, nothing too memorable. That didn't matter. What mattered was the outcome. If Bray Wyatt had won, then he would be made, and the image of him standing over Cena's lifeless body would endure. Unfortunately, that wasn't to be the case. I was there that night at WrestleMania in New Orleans, and when Cena defeated Wyatt, I remember the atmosphere and anticipation being sucked out of the building into thin air. Us fans in attendance could not believe that Cena had won. I mean, there would be another moment that night that had the same effect. It really was a roller coaster of a show. This was the first chink in the armour for Bray Wyatt, the first failure on WWE's behalf to spoil this unique character. We realised there and then that Bray Wyatt was not as bulletproof as we initially thought he was. After all of the water that's gone under the bridge since 2014, it's easy to forget how electric the rivalry between the Shield and the Wyatt family was. So much has changed in the intervening years that the landscape is nothing like it was back then. The members of the Shield have all gone their own separate ways or left WWE entirely, and the same can be said for the Wyatt family, and in the case of Luke Harper, one member tragically lost to us all. At the time, both factions had risen up to unprecedented heights by 2014, and it was only a matter of time before these two factions would go head to head in a battle for dominance. Each team was so over with the fans, and on this night at the Elimination Chamber pay-per-view, the fans in attendance were at a fever pitch. Both teams were being booked incredibly strongly, and both felt genuinely dangerous on the roster. This match for supremacy had to happen. The match flows perfectly, and it is excellent tag team wrestling. Everyone gets their spots in, but it doesn't feel as choreographed as so many multi-man tag team matches often feel. It just works. As the match inevitably breaks down into a brawl, every man digs their heels in and breaks out their riskiest moves. If you only watch one multi-man tag team match from the last decade, make sure this is it. Ultimately, the Wyatt family pick up the win in the most logical way possible. Roman Reigns is about to destroy Wyatt with the spear, but Harper steps in the way and sacrifices himself for the leader. Wyatt attacks with a perfectly timed crossbody splash to Reigns before hitting him with Sister Abigail for the win. It's a perfectly booked match with a brilliant finish. There is a trend that has become prevalent in WWE, especially at WrestleMania, that I utterly detest. That is the returning veteran superstar, usually a former main eventer, to mock or outright destroy a current wrestler. A perfect example of this is at WrestleMania 32 in 2016, where The Rock returned alongside John Cena for a segment involving the Wyatt family. The Great One came to the ring to announce the attendance record for the night before being interrupted by Wyatt, Rowan and Strowman. Wyatt threatened to eviscerate The Rock, but The Rock was ready for action. He tore off his pants and was ring ready to face Wyatt in a match. Instead, The Rock got a match against Erick Rowan and defeated him in a mere 6 seconds after hitting a rock bottom. As the Wyatt family surrounded the ring, John Cena came to the aid of The Rock, not like he needed it. Cena hit the attitude adjustment on Rowan and Wyatt got a people's elbow from The Rock, and the two returning legends stood tall over the supposed future of the business. It is indicative of WWE's problem as a whole and not producing permanent main event superstars and relying far too much on its past rather than looking at the future. Those legends should be putting over the young men and women who are working every night. Fans rejoiced as Bray Wyatt defeated 5 other superstars inside the Elimination Chamber to win his first WWE Championship in 2017. He eliminated entering champion John Cena in handy fashion, some payback for the indiscretion at WrestleMania 3 years earlier. The match as a whole was fantastic, certainly in many fans' top 5 Elimination Chamber matches of all time, and the win went to the correct superstar in the end. In hindsight, the moment is tainted. To set up their eventual match at WrestleMania, Randy Orton had joined the Wyatt family in a stilted feud that led to one of the dumbest matches in WrestleMania history between Orton and Wyatt that featured spooky, supernatural elements that just totally killed any suspension of disbelief you might have had going in. Randy Orton won that match at WrestleMania, by the way, and he took the championship with him. Never mind, we'll always have the Elimination Chamber. By the end of 2017, Wyatt had been on the end of lots of bad booking, and it really was testament to the strength of the character that most fans were still on his side. Silliness followed silliness for Bray, as ever since the end of the Wyatt family, WWE moved the character on from ominous cult leader to supernatural being. During this late 2017 feud with Finn Balor, WWE writers turned up the lame dial to 11 as Sister Abigail finally made an appearance, although not in the way any of us had expected. Turns out that it's actually Sister Abigail inhabiting Wyatt's body. That's not true. It's actually Wyatt talking with a voice box and a veil on his head for some reason. This was utter nonsense. In 2019, it seemed that WWE had finally realised the error of their ways in their booking of Wyatt, and seeing that fans were still invested in the character, it was worth putting the effort in to salvage him. No doubt we can put the genius of the Fiend character directly at the feet of the talented mind of Wyndham Rotunda, rather than either Vince McMahon or any of his writers. It felt like this new facet of the character was a real step forward and a real fresh start. A few months earlier, the character had already evolved into a fun children's entertainer, as an apparently changed Bray Wyatt introduced his Firefly Funhouse segments every week on TV. Fans were intrigued by this development, and as Wyatt's fun segments got darker and weirder as time went on, it turned out that Bray was more psychotic than ever before. Both the children's entertainer and the Fiend made for a perfect schizophrenic character of light and day, the kind we'd not seen in WWE since Mankind's debut in the mid-90s. The Fiend made his now iconic in-ring debut at SummerSlam 2019, and his entrance to the match was unforgettable. The fans loved this turning point in Bray Wyatt's character, and we were all hopeful that this would produce a new era for the beloved superstar. WWE was showing an unusual amount of restraint in spite of their bad booking. History has shown us that once they've totally messed up a character, they usually just toss that character and possibly even the wrestler to one side. But the perseverance on their behalf at this point was commendable. Goldberg, a man who had no right being anywhere near a WWE ring in 2020, squashed Wyatt in minutes and lifted the Universal Championship. At the prior Saudi show, Goldberg had one of the worst matches in living memory against The Undertaker, a match he actually had to apologise for, and here, inexplicably, he'd been given the main event and the Universal title, no less, in a match that was utterly deplorable. Wyatt ate 4 spears and a poorly executed jackhammer as Goldberg pinned him to end the match. This was nonsensical booking at its very worst, as Wyatt had spent years coming back from 0 odds to win, including taking sledgehammer shots and curb stomps. Here, all it took was one lazy looking jackhammer in order to be defeated. It turned out that Wyatt did not need a title belt for what was coming next. WWE were happy to leave their comfort zone and try new things during the no-crowd pandemic era. Some of it was bad, some of it was very good. John Cena was finally completing that winding down that started back at WrestleMania 30 in 2014, soon to disappear from WWE for good. Before he did that, he had some paying back to do. This wasn't a match in the conventional sense, instead it was an experience. A cinematic match, as the term has now been coined. Bray Wyatt took John Cena on a haunted house journey through his own career and all of the discrepancies along the way. We'd never seen the all-conquering Cena this vulnerable before. It was mind-blowing to see him in this situation, but you had to see it to believe it, and to even start to understand it. Wyatt took Cena and the fans on a twisted journey through his career, with lots of callbacks and Easter eggs along the way. Bray Wyatt won the match, if you can call it that. Cena finally put him over on the grandest stage of them all. It's a shame then, in hindsight, that just over a year later it would be all for nothing when Wyatt was shockingly released from his contract. Now, in the interim between the Firefly Funhouse and Wyatt's release, there was utter crap produced thanks to Alexa Bliss, and I could include that in this list as well. The truth is, I want to end this list on a good point rather than a bad one. On balance, Wyndham Rotunda provided us with more memorable moments than bad ones in WWE, and that is what we should hold on to and be excited for the future. Hopefully, Wyndham's next employer, whoever that is, will fulfill his potential to the maximum and will have more good times than bad in AEW or wherever he emerges next.
Are you ready?